Good afternoon, everyone. So with regards to theme 1, which we started with this morning, and just a brief reminder, that was in the interest in and knowledge of science and technology and the environment, and that was the theme that we covered first. Some of the outcomes that I put forward this morning related to that theme were around public, the public were more knowledgeable in terms of items that had dominated the news cycles, and that there was modest, there was modest improvement when it comes to science knowledge over time that was observed, but that needed to be improved, and that the public were more knowledgeable and interested in topics that reflect some of their unmet basic needs, and that there were apparent gaps in the basic scientific knowledge among South Africans. And lastly, that socio-demographic factors influenced who had interest and knowledge in science and technology, as well as who had knowledge and concern regarding the environment. And then with regards to what emanated from the breakaway sessions, I think the discussion had to evolve around, firstly, the first question was what needed to happen in South Africa to increase knowledge and concern about the natural environment amongst the public. So some of the outcomes from the group discussions included interventions that needed transformative education, supporting public engagements, establishing trust through community engagements, as well as science communication, as well as skills development. These are the areas that were common amongst all the stakeholders across the rooms. And then when it comes to, there were some of the differences that in terms of the interventions across the rooms. In academia and research was more focused on building the knowledge in terms of them proposing interventions around knowledge development and how this knowledge is presented to communities as well as to the public, and proposing awareness as well as interventions around language and how that is things are translated to the public to understand, as well as curriculum development. And in terms of civil society or the communications group, I think they had proposed interventions that were more targeted towards women, I think, which is one of the gaps that my presentation had highlighted, that particularly females and from poor background the survey had demonstrated that subpopulation was the least was getting the lowest scores, as well as the least knowledgeable and the least content when it comes to the categories that were involved. So civil society had proposed interventions that target women, and then when it came to the business group, I think they were more focused on what is needed in terms of their they had proposed interventions that were geared towards skills development, capacitating teachers, as well as entrepreneurial related interventions. And then lastly, I think government, when it comes to this question, had also proposed interventions basically related to their experience around the need for transformative education, as well as overall improvement on the governance of knowledge and science in the country. And then moving on to the second question, which covered what needs to happen to help people understand the promise of modern science and technology. What was common amongst all the stakeholders is the need for believability, and the need to make science cool and relevant, as well as the need to expose the public to science, technology, and innovation, as well as interventions around interactive experimental learning, and lastly, community involvement. And so those were the broad categories that were common and the most voted for amongst those groups. And then when it comes to some of the differences between the groups, again, the business group had interventions that were more geared toward entrepreneurship as expected. And then civil society had more interventions again here that were related to around mobilizing women to promote education on the environment, basically more community involvement but geared towards capacitating women and involving women more. And then government had also proposed interventions around promoting active citizenship, as well as academia proposed interventions that were geared towards more science, technology, and research, in a sense that they proposed promoting environmental benefits, as well as promoting environmental jobs in order to entice people towards understanding the environment, and as well as channeling more people towards environmental related sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And in particular, thank you so much for the wonderful, rich discussions you had in the breakaway groups. It was almost impossible for me to capture, let me say, the full thrust of your discussions, obviously flipping between a selection of groups. One only catches a little bit here and there of the actual discussions, but that was great, the bits that I did catch. And then I studied the boards of your themes that you put up there, and I'm stunned by the richness and diversity, yes, but within certain bounds. There's a lot of conversions between the different discussions. Obviously, the discussion was promise and reservation attitudes towards modern and traditional science and technology. And the two questions were, first one, what needs to happen in South Africa to help people understand the promise, the benefits of modern science and technology? From this morning's discussion, it's obvious that quite a lot has been happening, that there is quite a level of awareness, quite a level of endorsement. It's never simple attitudes. They often are characterized by the coexistence of, yes, there's promise, but simultaneously there are disadvantages, and people express their reservations on that. That was all in this morning's discussion. I am here simply briefly going to refer to the convergence of issues that I found in the breakaway groups. And there was a lot of convergence. I'm not going to single it out by which group of stakeholders was where, because there's so much convergence between them. It's also quite obvious points, but the richness is often in the specific details of the proposals. So, in the first place, it's advocacy, surprise, surprise, advocacy and spread the word of science and technology, modern knowledge, and people will grow into it even more, and perhaps it can help counter some adverse cynicisms that are growing about it. For example, some of the ways that advocacy and spreading the word can be done. And I'm sure you'll recognize yourselves in these points. Personalized benefits. Communicate the relevance very concretely, very specifically, in communities where there's obviously a great need for it. There's a great need for development, for fruitful employment, for whatever the case may be. There is so much need in society. And spread that word, make the examples of the contributions and the benefit of modern society very tangible. Use case studies that are tangible. use relevant programs, themes, relevant to the communities and experiences in daily life, but put these messages out there, and some of the other points go more on the how. For example, talk about the publicize, but do perhaps in something like road shows, start in a community, let that kind of cascade up, blossom out, and can be made provincial, regional initiatives. It can be national initiatives. There can be national, maybe linked to international, but definitely national days. Create national days to celebrate science, to publicize community initiatives, and a much greater awareness is likely to result. Use recognizable ambassadors in these projects. And some of this may already exist in communities. There were a few examples, yes, this exists, yes, there is a science center, etc. But in almost all cases, there was a need to elaborate it further, to publicize, to put it in the public eye. And then role models, recognizable ambassadors and role models could go a long way to help publicize, popularize, endorse, give legitimacy and credibility to these projects, especially if it's pointed out concretely how it can benefit, will benefit, has been benefiting a particular community. Open days at institutions, even at schools, where staff, pupils are profiling their very mundane, perhaps very basic, but notable school projects that imagine the spectacular value of blowing up the school hall with your chemistry experiment. Fantastic stuff. Do science stories, preferably not the blowing up the school hall stories, but do science stories. Ensure, or do something, help ensure that it gets publicized in the media, on radio, in different contexts. I heard another group really emphasize radio. Another one emphasize those written stories that can get legs of their own. Show the people the benefits. That is basically the bottom line of what I just said, but it's also a very strong separate theme that emerged from these discussions. Media stories about the impact of science, about how science has been changing lives, about how further development of science is likely to further help expand that. How the benefits of the science, definitely, people already endorsed it, but they can do it even more strongly than that. How the benefits can really outweigh the detriments or drawbacks. Work on a third and last point here, accessibility of science. There are open days at research institutions that, you see, the themes are really interlinking. Open days at research institutions can go a long way, not just at the schools, at research institutions can help go a long way to help publicize and popularize. And of course, it will be chain communications, not just the event, but as you also do through the current event here, media, spread the message, let it flow out from here. Partnerships with civil society should definitely also be elaborated. There is so much uptake on that. On the science side in particular, there are so many possibilities there. Empower teachers to simplify. Some people, one of the groups also had a debate on, should it actually be simplified, science? Is it not detracting from the inherent character of science if one simplifies? But I think a strong argument was made there that the simplification in terms of accessibility and popularizing is an excellent, if not indispensable, starting point to do that. So, friends, colleagues, this is just a small snippet of your answers on the first question. There is much more richness in the discussions that will come out in due course. The second question that people addressed, and the answers and responses were as fascinating, is what needs to happen in South Africa to address reservations or concerns that people have about traditional knowledge. Good, there are a few themes. I've got 5 or 6 separate themes here with also kind of interlocking as well. Let me go through it. Prove the value of traditional knowledge through science. Publicize, demystify the IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Systems, IKS benefits. Publish research, do that more systematically. Research on IKS. IKS, should that not perhaps be considered not compulsory, but for university curricula? Document the successful use of Indigenous knowledge systems and knowledge as such. Document successful cases, remove the secrecy. Very practical, down-to-earth proposals there. The stress was also placed on the need to have cross-generational collaboration. Take young people, young learners, for example, and this happens all the time, but it can perhaps be done more systematically and ensuring that some, for example, rural or other disadvantaged schools that do not normally get to visit museums or visit something like the Origin Center at Wits, like they also get the opportunity to do that. There's going to be small entrance points into connecting the young generation to the more traditional levels of knowledge. Dialogues, this was stressed across most of the group. Have dialogues, promote public dialogues, public discussions, involve traditional knowledge holders in that process. Have multilingual awareness. Have the dialogues between traditional knowledge bearers. Traditional knowledge bearers need much more of a normal, pardon the word, it's not intended to be patronizing, normalization or mainstreaming is perhaps a better word. Mainstreaming in terms of science knowledge. Do more to acknowledge traditional knowledge as standard knowledge. Conscientize and educate people to forgo perhaps pre-existing belief systems that they are, especially these are just modern, that they can be better aware, although there already is a high level of awareness, but it can be improved. More better awareness that the conventional conceptions of knowledge are not the only ones and that there are perfectly acceptable, credible ways of using it all. Mainstreaming itself can also stand as one of the themes, and the second last week, the one that is coming out of these discussions. Enable access to cutting-edge IKS research. Include and elaborate the Africa dimension in that. There's a great cultural awareness. There's a great need in society to be more familiar with comparative information about knowledge systems in other parts of the world and in other parts of Africa. There is a great space for that. Good. And the last one, protect and commercialize. That can also be a way to bring out the benefits of traditional knowledge. IKS projects, products and technologies, profile these, also demystify it, and develop a system of accreditation for these products. And it can be, for example, standards done in terms of standards for accreditation, can be done by regular review. So thank you very much, colleagues. These are just a couple of the fascinating ideas that came out of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. The two questions are on the screen. What should be the role of a network of science centers and professional associations in enhancing trust and confidence in science? 2, how should intergovernmental agreements be exploited to enhance trust and confidence in science? So I'm going to put on the screen what the groups have scribbled. So there's no interpretation. They speak for themselves. So that's the first group, and you can see even the voting patterns in the groups. So efficiency and effectiveness for impact is coming through in that group. So I'm not going to write, I'm just going to look at the high-level topics. Again here, advocacy, I think it was mentioned. Collaboration, very important, but you can see the actions in verbs. And you look at the statements, they'll clarify, and also defending truth in science. That has come through, and they elaborate what actions must be taken to defend the truth in science. You also have overarching phrase there, amplify the impact of grassroots initiatives. Very important, and you can see how they craft the action verbs for consideration by both the department as well as the HSRC. And here, science centers play very important roles, and they elaborate what needs to be done to make sure they continue to be supported there. And also more comments from private sector to support science centers. So they elaborate actions there. And then governance has been raised also as a matter, as an important issue. And then coherence and collaboration. Advocacy again, collaboration again, optics, and then defending the truth. And then you have promote inclusivity, and there are action statements that needs to be considered to promote this area. Accessible and effective communication. Increase funding, obviously funding had to come somewhere, there it is, for publication, and bridge the gap to communities. Accessibility again, resources again, and infrastructure. Governance is coming again, different groups. So in short, what is this telling us? What it tells us is around efficiency and effectiveness. And it means we'll have to measure, be able to measure this. In 2027, look back, have we become more efficient? Have we become more effective? The issue of accessibility has come time and again, resources and governance. Advocacy, collaboration, and defending the truth. Will we be able to assess this? In 2027, when we reflect back to 2025, will we see improvement? Inclusivity. And inclusivity can happen at many levels. We'll have to look at the action statements of what it means, and then how we can improve on it. Optics. And then coherence. And again, where we do have agreements, we need to amplify. And lastly, the issue of infrastructure. I thank you.